The Houston Rockets, 41-41, almost made the play-in, not quite there, fueled largely by a winning streak in March where they won four of their first five games in the streak. Then Alperen Şengün went down with an injury, and then they proceeded to win another nine straight, making it 13 out of 14 in March. Now, seven of those nine wins without Şengün, I should mention, were against very easy opponents. There's like Washington, and the Jazz twice, the Wizards and Jazz twice, Portland, Chicago, San Antonio. That's not really impressive, but they still went off on a winning streak, and some of that can be credited to Jalen Green, who played incredible when Şengün was out. Some of that's just beating up on bad teams, but I do think we need to have this larger conversation when it comes to Houston about the roles of Şengün and Green going forward. Um, Most people around the NBA took notice of the fact that neither has been extended yet. There are questions about whether or not the two can coexist. Şengün is this terrific offensive fulcrum. He can handle the ball, pass it, score in various ways. He's not the best defensively, which is kind of a concern as a center, which is why the Rockets keep trying to get other centers to sort of hide that fact, to mask that issue. Meanwhile, Jalen Green, excellent explosive offensive player, very streaky, not a great defender, undersized. Both of them, I don't know. There's an argument to be made for either of them being the sort of guy of the future. I think putting both together would be a little shaky, but it's not impossible. There is a way to make it work if you put defense all around them. Speaking of defense, there is plenty of defense on Houston. I should mention that they have Fred Van Vliet, they have Jabari Smith, they have Tari Eason. Now, Tari Eason missed a lot of games last season. He only played 22 games after a shin injury, but he's there. Jason Tate is a solid player on an expiring deal, but solid player you could look at. Jabari Smith Jr., as I've mentioned, Dylan Brooks is there, and for all of his maturity issues and questions about his leadership, he was a little bit more efficient last season. He was actually 36% on threes last season, which is unheard of for especially for Dylan Brooks as a high volume guy, and played well for the Rockets and plays really good defense. And you look at sort of a lot of the pieces on the team. There is a lot of Fred Van Vliet, solid defender still. Jeff Green, when he plays, he's getting older, but when he plays, still like not the worst defensively. And Ime Udoka, a very defensive-minded coach who helped Boston get to the finals. Now, I have mixed feelings about Udoka, not even about the Boston scandal. I'm just not sure that he is the guy. That being said, I looked up a couple stats just because I was curious. The Rockets are a very young team, yet they were first in fast break offense, which makes sense. And sorry, they were first in fast break defense, which is pretty nuts for a young team, and they were fifth in fast break points. That makes more sense, young and athletic and whatever. They're also eighth in turnovers, so that usually is a sign of a well-coached team. They're third in rebounds, which is pretty good. Like, there's signs there that Udoka could get this team to the finals someday. I'm not gonna just assume that happens by default. There's still questions because the Rockets do have a lot of young guys. I also should mention the Rockets are returning 97% of their minutes from last season, which is like the most in the NBA, if not by a long shot, but definitely by a lot. Rip Boban Marjanovic, by the way. Like, it's sad that he's not in the league anymore, but I understand it. But back to the original point, Rockets are returning most of their guys, but think about the Rockets with how they built their team. They've got like veterans, sure, like your Jeff Green, your Fred Van Vliet, your Dylan Brooks, but then you have a lot of young guys who really need minutes and really need to play and develop. And now you have Cam Whitmore, who played well last year. You draft Reed Shepard. In theory, he has to get some minutes. So where are going to be minutes for some of the rest of the guys on the roster? Steven Adams didn't play last year. He got traded to Houston midseason, but he's a valuable guy if you're trying to get to the playoffs, which sort of seems to be the Rockets' plan. So a lot of minutes for a lot of young guys and a lot of vets that have to kind of be figured out. Now, as for the sort of outlook of Houston, I certainly think the play-in is within reach. I think they could hit playoffs, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think they're a little bit outside the play-in because the West is so deep this year. And, that's kind of hard to supplant with just youth and athleticism. You got to have a little something extra. And Fred Van Vliet is getting a little older. Jeff Green's getting a little older. Steven Adams is getting older. He's 31. Like, the vets, who knows how much they're going to really be able to impact winning, especially when you're trying to make the playoffs in a loaded West. On the bright side, though, if Houston does not win, they have a ton of draft picks. They have their own. They have a bunch with swaps. They, did a trade in the offseason to give Brooklyn back its picks, but they have a ton of assets going forward. So if they ever want to go big game hunting and try and swing for a star, I know KD was floated during the offseason. I don't see KD to the Rockets making a ton of sense, but surely there are some stars you could trade for if you really want. But I think if you're Houston, you play out this year. You get off Van Vliet's contract because that's a team option for next year, and you figure out who are the guys. Is Jalen Green a guy? Is Alperen Sengun a guy? What about Jabari Smith Jr.? What about Tari Eason? Like, these guys need to get minutes, and Cam Whitmore and Reed Shepard and whoever else I'm forgetting, they need to get minutes, and then you figure it out from there. I would say overall, even if the Rockets don't make the playoffs this year, I think their future is bright, but it's going to take a few years to get there. So if you're Houston, just play patient, figure out what you got, and I think the answer will come to you naturally.